Hey friends, today we are doing my top 5 best and top 5 worst reads of 2022. And no, these are not actually my worst, these are just 5 random books for the thumbnail. These are just 5 random books off my shelf. I don't own any of my worst reads because I got them out of my life. But these books in my hands are very much my 5 top reads of 2022. I had to own them. I own them because I love them. But today we are going to start with my top 5 worst reads so that the video gets more positive as we go on. In that 5th place spot, we have Hide by Kiersten White. I've talked about this book in my Literally Dead Book Club backlog video, so if you want to hear more, go there. But this is in my 5th spot because while I was so excited for an abandoned amusement park thrill ride death game scenario, the fact is that this book is written very much in a style that's more suited to YA, even though this was supposed to be an adult horror thriller. It's not at the top of my worst reads list because it did still have an amusement park and a death game, and that is always a good time. Unfortunately, the writing was just not for me. The characters were way too basic, and just overall it just felt really underbaked. In the number 4 position, we have The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. Ooh, this one really hurts my soul because I had such high expectations for it. The premise is so much fun. The idea is that this family of 3 is vacationing in a cabin in the woods, and suddenly they get a knock on their door from 3 strangers wielding very intense and dangerous weapons. And the 3 people at the door have a very intense proposition for our protagonists. This sounded like so much fun, and in the beginning it was super tense. This has a lot of gore, and there's just a lot of fun within that concept. However, I felt that this book really did not know what it wanted to say on the various themes that it attempted to bring up. And I just felt that the result was super messy. Also, the tension leaves within the first 50 pages, and for a horror thriller, that was just not enough for me. I did stick it out because I was genuinely curious, but I just felt like in the end, it just didn't know where it actually wanted to go. It seemed like Paul Tremblay had an idea, but he did not know how to execute it. In my number 3 spot is unfortunately yet another thriller, and honestly there were a bunch of thrillers that could have been in this spot. There was a lot that I had up for consideration, but at the end of the day I went with one that I felt was really just missing on a couple different levels rather than just maybe on one thing. Typically with thrillers, the writing style is the biggest hurdle for me to get over, but this did some other things that I didn't like also. And that book is Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. Wow. Let me just say, Riley Sager's not for me, and if Riley Sager is for you, I can totally see why you might not agree with this opinion, and that is why it's all just opinions on the internet. I thought that the writing and the characters was just way too simplistic. It was very difficult to be engaged with the main character's struggle, and then the mystery is just absolutely insane, and honestly not that scary. I feel like, again, there could have been such great potential for a really spooky, eerie story here, but the writing just never wanted to make it actually eerie. And then when you get to the end and things start to get really out of control, it just feels like, why didn't we use our time more wisely and more efficiently to create more of a sense of dread throughout the entire thing? And also, why didn't we create an ending that's like genuinely scary? Also, Riley Sager does try to say something. It does have a message in this story, and I think it was fine. I think it was perfectly finely executed for the fact that this is a popcorn thriller, and maybe you're not really expecting so much social commentary, but I still think that it was a bit too on the nose, and just not for me. And in that number 2 spot, my second worst read of the year was The Other Side of Night by Adam Hamdy. I do have a whole video on this, so I'll try not to take too much time, But basically, this book thought that it was so clever, it thought it was doing a twist that you would never see coming, and I did see it coming, and it wasn't that great at hiding it. And also, our protagonist is a woman who is supposed to be a detective. She's supposed to be actively, solving the mystery, which keeps being prevalent in the book. The book keeps telling us, oh, there's a big mystery, we've got to solve it. And yet, the only thing our protagonist is interested in is her ex-boyfriend. And it's extremely distracting because I just don't feel like anybody would actually act like that. And then on top of that, she also just didn't solve any part of the mystery. So not great representation in my opinion. And my number one worst read of 2022 is a book that I cannot stop ranting about. That is Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bazarica. I apologize if I did not pronounce her name correctly. And this might be a shock to probably a lot of people because I have had so many people, fellow booktubers, who generally I do align with their reading taste, say that they love this book. And I simply just cannot understand it at all. I don't want to be too mean, but this book was a complete disaster for me, and it's really sad because I think that it had some good concepts in it. So this is a very short book, and it is about a fictional plague which makes all of the animals contaminated to the point that we cannot eat them. So apparently society evolves to breed humans specifically for consumption. Listen, that sounds like a lot of fun. That sounds like there's a lot of things to talk about. I'm a vegetarian myself, so, I think I would be the target audience for this concept. However, it is basically 100% shock value gore. So, for that, to its merit, it does get its point across very clearly. It depicts a step-by-step process of like a killing floor that would be found in in industrial animal agriculture. So in that sense, it does get its point across. However, it quickly unravels. It has way too many thoughts just jam-packed in there, and it doesn't really consider the implications of its own metaphor to the point where the metaphor just completely falls apart. It tries to do way too much, and also it just doesn't seem to really know what it wants to say. I did read an interview with this author who, was very adamant about her position, and it's not just about, industrial animal agriculture, but it's also about the violence that we inflict onto other humans, and I see that. I really do. I see what she's trying to say, but the plot and the focus of the book is just so messy that it honestly just drowns in its own concepts. I really think this had the makings of something really great, but it was just way too much of a mess to get to anything important. A lot of people did like this book though because it has gore to the max and it is quite shocking, but that is just not enough for me. I need something that has a very distinct and thoughtful message, and I just did not think that this did the job. Okay, let's be done being extremely negative, and I am so sorry if any of those are your favorite books. I am glad that you enjoyed them. But now let's get into my top 5 best reads of 2022. First up, we have My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This is a literary fiction story about a girl who at 15 was manipulated into a sexual relationship with her high school professor. Obviously, with this subject matter, this book covers a lot of really intense and difficult discussions, scenes, very explicit and graphic scenes that are just honestly quite hard to read. But what I think is so brilliant about this book is that it is not just depicting this relationship that was just, wildly inappropriate, but actually our main character, Vanessa, in her older age, still looks back on that relationship and believes that there was love there. This was a direction that I was not expecting this book to go at all, but what it actually did was examine the mindset of a woman who was severely traumatized as a child at 15 years old, and really what that did to her psyche, to her impressions of relationships, to her general outlook on life, to everything about her personality was being really defined by this experience that she had. And it was just such an intimate portrait of this character. I was so impressed with the writing. I was so enveloped in Vanessa's story, just every part of it. And also, it's just so engrossing to read from this character's perspective. And, I am not really here to start discourse about what's better, first person or third person. But in my opinion, if you're going to use first person, really using it to a specific end is one of my favorite things. And I think this accomplishes it really, really well. You get inside Vanessa's head and you really get an understanding of how this experience will shape a person. Next we have In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is a creative memoir, kind of told in mini essays. It combines researched essays on pop culture with the experience that the author had herself in an abusive domestic relationship with her girlfriend. It explores how lesbian relationships are often looked at as the pinnacle of perfect relationships, and yet how she experienced abuse and how abuse can come in many different forms. But what was really just so striking about this is the different creative avenues that she takes as an author to tell this story. It's really difficult to even explain what this is. It's kind of just something that you have to experience. But wow, it moved me from page one. I could not put this down and I can't stop thinking about it. Coming in at number 3, it's Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Ghazi. This is a literary fiction novel that was easily the most moving and emotional thing I read this year. It is so beautiful. Ya Ghazi can tell a story like no other, but what really comes through here is our main character. This is about a family experiencing many different degrees of hardship, but specifically a struggle with addiction, and it's really the story of our protagonist and her relationship with her brother. This book covers themes of familial relationships, racism in America, the struggle of adapting to a new culture, and the ways in which our lives are shaped by our experiences in childhood. I was so blown away by this book. It really unfolds like a tapestry or like a puzzle where you get little tiny glimpses and then in the end you really see the full picture. And I just was so blown away from the very, very beginning. I absolutely love this story, and I hope that I get to read more of Ya Ghazi really soon. Number 2, my second best read of 2022 is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. Now, technically, I've actually read this book before. I read this book my freshman year of college, but clearly I could not understand the level of genius that this book is when I was a freshman in college, because from what I remembered of reading it, it was just kind of a slow-moving story, very intimate, very character focused, and at the time that just really wasn't my thing. I was into really high concept stories and ideas and things with a lot of plot, but coming to this as a more fleshed out adult, I thought this was absolutely phenomenal. This is a sort of speculative sci-fi, but mostly it's just literary, and yes, this is a very close, intimate character study almost. It's very, very in the head of our main protagonist, but wow, this character feels so real, her thoughts are so genuine, and Ishiguro can really just write a story. Even though there wasn't a lot of plot that was necessarily happening, I felt constantly engaged by Ishiguro's storytelling, by our protagonist. You keep wanting to know what's going on, even though that's not even the biggest and most important aspect of this. Really, this is about our protagonist and her two close friends, their relationship, and them coming to this kind of existential realization, and the ending is just, it's so good. It's so good in my opinion. It leaves so much food for thought, and I just found myself absolutely absorbed in this story. Ishiguro, I think, could become a new favorite author. I am already so excited to read more of his works. And finally, we've reached my number one position. My top read of 2022 was Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. Now, I want to say a couple things on this before I get into talking about why I love this. Just because this is my top read of 2022, it doesn't mean that I think it's like technically better than, you know, the other books in my top 5 list. It's more just I had such an emotional reaction to this book that it really stuck with me. And also, this is my first Sally Rooney that I've ever read, which is a super weird entry point for Sally Rooney, but it was the perfect point for me. The thing is, I think that I was at the perfect point in my life to connect with this book, and that's why it became my top of 2022. It is technically very great. Sally Rooney is amazing. But I think that for me in my life, at this time, at this point in my life, I connected so closely with this book. And I know that a lot of people are already disagreeing. And that's okay, because I think a lot of times when you come to a book where you are in your life, I think that makes a big difference on whether or not you're going to really appreciate that work. In line with saying that, this book is mainly about two young women, they're best friends, and it's honestly really just about their interpersonal relationships, but it's about them in their mid to late 20s, kind of just figuring out how they want to go about the world, because this is about modern young people, which I am a modern young person, so I definitely felt that I connected with a lot of the thoughts and ideas in here, but really this is just about these two women who are kind of overwhelmed with the state of the world, pain, suffering, and fear that is present in our world because of climate fears, political unrest, general human rights issues. It's these two women trying to balance, like, how do you move in a world that is so difficult and still go about your day-to-day life and still worry about things like relationship drama and careers and where you're gonna live, and like how do you be a human when you know that so much horrible stuff is going on? And I just found every bit of this so moving. This really, really, really like just got to my core. Sally Rooney is such a great author. The climactic scene in this book is just something that is going to stick with me for a long time. And I know it's not going to be for everybody. I really do. But when a book moves you that much, I think it's just such a magical experience, and I just want everyone to experience that magic, whether or not it's with my favorite book of 2022. So there you go, guys. Those were my top 5 best reads of 2022 and my top 5 worst reads of 2022. I hope you enjoyed watching this. Thank you guys so much for being here. Let me know in the comments down below what was your favorite read of last year. Thanks so much. Bye!